Welcome to Satay,
Okay.
a podcast about the foods that have shaped Malaysia. I'm Dr. Nobby Leong, scientist, food writer, and broadcaster.
And I'm Philip Gibson, photographer and empath.
And in this series, we explore the history, cultures, and cuisines of Malaysia, from the ancient lands of Southeast Asia all the way through to the creation of a modern-day nation. In today's episode, we take a look at toddy and the Colonisers' secret treaty. So, fill up those ink pots and get ready for satay.
Okay.
So, Philip.
Yeah.
In the last episode, we looked at how Britain wormed its way to take over the island of Penang in the 18th century, followed by Singapore. In today's episode, we're going to continue that journey into the 19th century and see how Britain continued its colonial trajectory into the region. And I will try my hardest not to get too angry today because there are some very egregious colonial acts which always get my blood boiling.
Yes. And I'm not even going to apologise on behalf of the British Empire because
Nor
I want
should
nothing
you.
to do with it.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
But first, before we do that, let's look at our food symbol of the day, one that I don't think many people would have heard of, and that is toddy. So when I say toddy, I don't mean hot toddy, which I think more people in Britain and Australia are familiar with.
Certainly, yeah, like hot whiskey and lemon and honey and maybe some cloves and spices, which has got a connection to Southeast Asia
Yeah.
then, if it's got some aromatics in it.
So toddy is, I guess you could call it a coconut wine or a palm wine.
Okay.
So it's basically they collect the sap from an unopened flower bud of the coconut palm.
Right.
They collect it and then it's left to naturally ferment. So yeast that's present either in the sap or in the air inoculates the liquid. And then in the very hot and humid climate of Malaysia, it ferments to become alcoholic.
And probably in no time at all.
Yeah, though I do think there are some non-alcoholic varieties as well.
I guess if you tapped the plant or however you would describe it and got those liquids from the plant quickly and didn't leave it out for too long, it would be more of a fresh drink than a fermented drink.
Yeah, well, the fermentation process wouldn't have happened, so you wouldn't get all the alcohol getting produced.
Yeah.
And those fermenty, funky flavors that fermentation brings.
I wonder if it's a bit like mead, because isn't mead just kind of like honey and water, and the honey has like sugars and bacteria and stuff like that in it that ferments, and that's how mead kind of comes about, which is it's certainly an ancient European drink, isn't it? That's interesting. And very sugary, because having tried toddy, it is a very sweet drink, I would say.
Yeah, so the flavor for me, like kombucha, that's the kind of closest drink. You know how kombucha has those fermented kind of funky flavors?
Yeah, funk is the only word that you could use to describe it. It's just like, you know, that way where like cheese can be described as smelling of feet. Like.
Yeah, exactly. And like a really bad beer is funky as well.
Yeah, but that's probably going to rot your guts out, whereas like toddy shouldn't do that.
No. So it's something that I wasn't very familiar with at all. So I think my grandpa used to drink it.
Okay.
But my dad never drank it as far as I'm concerned. I can't remember my mum ever talking about it either.
Yeah, I think when we were in Malacca doing our research on this, we were chatting to a couple of people and it seemed to be that there was kind of negative connotations around this drink.
And yeah, that's what we're going to explore in the episode today. And perhaps that's why it's not as well known, because it's got some negative connotations. But I think even in Malaysia, toddy is quite uncommon.
Right.
It's not something that's widely available. And certainly if you're a tourist going to Malaysia, you would have to actively seek toddy out. I don't think you would just stumble across it like you would other drinks, other foods that are famous.
Yeah, and maybe also because of the people's kind of connotations of hot toddy, they were kind of like, why on earth do I want to drink hot whiskey
that's true.
in Malaysia?
Yeah, maybe even if it was available.
You'd just assume it was the whiskey-based drink and not something made from coconut or palm sap.
Yeah. I also think it's kind of the drink where there's not many brewers or sellers, and I think certainly back in the day, the only way you could obtain it is by knowing someone. In the way that durian used to be obtained just by knowing someone.
Kind of phone a guy, your dealer. Yeah.
Community, Philip.
Well, sure. Anyway, it sounds as though we could probably benefit from talking to somebody who has something to do with this.
So we'll introduce you to a toddy maker later in the episode. But for now, let's kind of look at our history of toddy in Malaysia and the context of it. So toddy is an Indian drink, and as we've talked about in previous episodes, Indians have been traveling to the Malay Peninsula for centuries. But the consumption of toddy takes on a pretty interesting role in Malaysian history when we start looking at the expansion of the British Empire. So again, as we talked about in the last episode, in the 18th century, Britain got a foothold in the Malay Peninsula by trading 12 soldiers for the island of Penang with our dear friend, the Sultan of Kedah, who was not happy with this great British lie.
I think you would certainly feel shortchanged. The shortchange that Francis Light was firing into the undergrowth to get his men to cut through it.
Yeah. I was kind of like thinking about this the other day and how I have 12 friends. Does this mean today, look, myself and those 12 friends could just get together and then just get one of the Scottish islands or something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think what islands must be about the same size. Arran's quite a big island. That's maybe too big for 12 people. But
Penang's quite big though.
I guess it is.
Remember, this is not an equal trade for them.
You're right, it doesn't matter. I don't know, I do get the impression, maybe, and if you live in the Isle of Arran and you're part of the local community, you can let us know in the comments, but that they're a bit fed up with North Ayrshire Council and certainly the neglect from the Scottish government. Maybe Arran wants to secede. Maybe it wants to do its own thing.
I would listen to the people of Arran.
Yeah, I bet you would, with all of their wool, cheese and whiskey or whatever else they produce on the island. Sorry, Arran, we love you. Anyway.
We love Arran. Mini Scotland.
Yeah.
So Britain has Penang, but it also has Singapore as well. And they gained Singapore by installing a puppet sultan and then signing a treaty with that puppet sultan. And that sort of begins contemporary Singapore, I suppose. The Singapore that we know today, this
modern Singapore,
this massive metropolis, has its start in the British acquisition
of the island, by Mr. Raffles.
Yes, Stamford Raffles, I guess you could call him the quote-unquote founder of contemporary Singapore.
Yeah.
Okay, so by the 19th century, we've got this really complex territorial situation across the Malay and Indonesian archipelagos because we have trading ports and regions that are run by both Britain and also run by the Dutch VOC. So if you want to kind of play along, it might help just to get a map for this point, just for fun. So if we look at just the Malay Peninsula at this stage, we have Britain is occupying Penang to the north and Singapore to the south of the Malay Peninsula. But the Dutch VOC has Malacca, which is smack bang in the middle.
Right.
Over on the Indonesian archipelago side, if we look at the two big islands of Sumatra and Java, Britain occupies a place called Bencoolen on Sumatra, while the Dutch headquarters are in Batavia.
Now known as Jakarta.
And that's on Java. So they're kind of up in each other's business, and it makes for a very messy situation because they get into all these trade disputes of who's allowed to trade with who. They're getting into fights all the time. And these two big European powers are really not happy with each other.
Yeah, I think I read as well that, if you were part of the East India Company in Britain, you would actively avoid ending up in one of these ports as an absolute kind of last resort sort of thing because you would just be imposed on massive tariffs for the amount of goods that you would have and stuff like that. And so that, I think, is why Britain and the Netherlands, or Holland, I guess at that point, were so keen to set up their own ports so that they did business with themselves.
Yeah.
But if you needed fresh drinking water or supplies, then you didn't have much of a choice. I think that seems to be what I've kind of deduced from this.
Well, to kind of sort out all those issues that were happening, London and Amsterdam end up doing some negotiations and they decide to sign a treaty between themselves, which would become known as the Anglo-Dutch Treaty of 1824. So what this treaty established was two spheres of influence. One was a British sphere of influence and the other one was a Dutch one. So Britain's sphere of influence was over the Malay Peninsula and the Dutch sphere of influence was over Sumatra and Java. So Britain couldn't get involved with the Dutch side and the Dutch couldn't get involved with the British side. So that meant that Dutch gave up Malacca to Britain and Britain gave up Bencoolen to the Dutch. So what you now have is British Malaya and the Dutch East Indies. And while this was a fantastic deal for both of these European players, not so great for anybody else.
I could imagine so.
So the treaty was signed without any real or meaningful consultation with the Malay rulers, and I'm guessing of the Indonesian rulers as well. They didn't get a say in this. And the people that signed the treaty were in London and Amsterdam, and they had never even visited the region before.
Yeah.
And so the consequences of this treaty meant that there were certain royal empires in the Malay world that were then divided because some of those empires stretched between those two spheres of influence. It also prevented locals from really having a say in their future. So with these spheres of influence, if you lived in the Malay Peninsula, you could only make agreements with Britain. You couldn't negotiate with other third parties.
Right.
Especially not other third European parties. So you were kind of locked in to trading with Britain and only Britain.
Right.
And then the other really major consequence is that these two spheres of influence essentially established a border between what's now Malaysia and Singapore and separated people from each other. In essence, they carved up Southeast Asia basically like a piece of meat, like they owned it, like it was theirs, like they could do whatever they wanted with it.
So this is the end of old Nusantara, basically.
Yeah.
Hard borders are being drawn.
And I think that's a really good point to mention, that the Malay and Indonesian archipelagos is Nusantara. And so for thousands of years, generations and generations of people have lived there. They've been traveling around these thousands of islands, going back and forth, marrying, sharing cultures, trading, living side by side. And now, because some Europeans decided they want to drink tea and crack some black pepper on their plate, that entire way of life disappeared. In a letter from one of the noblemen of Pahang, he wrote of his bewilderment of this treaty and said that it parted father from son, brother from brother, and friend from friend. So you can just see how impactful this treaty was for the people of Nusantara, who were no longer connected.
Yeah, it is a shame when you think about the people like Anglo. It's
And those are the sea peoples of Nusantara.
the people who were expert navigators and occasionally pirates for hire if they needed them. But as we heard in our interview in the episode on the Orang Laut people with Ilya, even just getting across the Strait of Johor now, with Singapore being an independent country from Malaya, as we will learn about in future episodes, you know, their ways of life are still being disrupted today by these hard borders. Yeah, you know, it's you see this kind of playing out in post-colonial places all over the world, don't you? Whether it's in the Middle East or whether it's in Africa or wherever else, it's just people with compasses and set squares and just drawing lines on maps. Well, it is frustrating because you certainly look at the amount of kind of like ethnic tension that still exists in the world today between all of these different places where you've got groups of people where the borders were drawn right through the middle of it. And did anybody ask the people that lived there, or was it, as you say, just spoken about in Whitehall somewhere in London, and a bit kind of like, oh yeah, old mate Winston Churchill just decides what we're going to do with Palestine. Oh right, okay. And then has anybody actually asked? No, here we are 100 years later after the Balfour Plan and we're still at war. So anyway.
We have to take some deep breaths.
Yeah.
I think it is important to realize that the legacy of this treaty still exists today. British Malaya was a predecessor to Malaysia. Dutch East Indies was a predecessor to what we now know as Indonesia. So if perhaps history had actually gone a different way, those two nations might be a lot more united than they actually are.
Yeah. I think what also surprises me is that you've got some cities that are on Sumatra, which Kuala Lumpur is much closer to them as a capital city. I've got a friend from Aceh, which is at the very northern tip of Sumatra, and he says he probably spends more time in Penang and Kuala Lumpur than he does going to Jakarta because it's a 1 hour flight instead of a 3 hour flight.
Oh wow, yeah.
So it's, and yeah, it's again, like when you look at a map, like, you know, it's not that we're sitting here telling these colonists that they got it wrong, but...
Well, they did.
But they did get it wrong, but like, it's... You know, we talk about Srivijaya and how that was on Palembang, which was also on the island of Sumatra. And it seems as though Sumatra and Peninsular Malaysia have more in common. And so the fact that it even ended up with the Dutch in the first place just seems quite surprising to me. But again, it's all about that lucrative business being on the Strait of Malacca and being able to control and trade through that bottleneck. Yeah. It still exists today.
Yeah. I mean,
well, the islands are still there.
Geography is geography, and can't get around that.
Whether it's the Suez or whether it's the Panama Canal or whether it's the Strait of Malacca, It cannot be emphasized enough that how important these bodies of water are.
In history and today.
Yes, yeah.
As important just to note is that when Britain and Holland essentially signed this treaty, it was all done under the guise of legality. So because they had a contract, they could claim that this was a legal agreement and they were legally now had these two spheres of influence. But really, that wasn't the case. There wasn't consultation, there wasn't agreements with the actual Malay rulers, the people of the Malay Peninsula and also of Indonesia. So when we claim that these treaties were these legal documents, that's a smokescreen. That is 100% deception, and that's a rewriting of the historical reality.
Yeah.
Okay, that was like probably as angry as I'm going to try and get at this point.
Yeah.
Oh wait, no, I'm about to get angrier. Okay.
Let it rip.
So now we have British Malaya, and as Britain expands its empire, it starts to require a larger labor force. So we'll talk about how Britain expanded the empire in the next episode, but I want to kind of give you an understanding of how Britain actually powered Malaya at this point. So it starts to get involved not with just trade, but it's also getting involved with actual industries and production of resources that they want to trade. So they start getting involved more with tin mining, with the production of pepper and other spices. They also experiment with sugar, coffee, a product called gambia, which is a plant that's used in tanning, and also rubber. So these industries start to become really massive. There's also infrastructure like ports and railways that need to be built. So Britain needed to find workers. Didn't like to deal with the local Malay workers. Britain viewed the Malay population with contempt. They branded them as lazy and unwilling to work for wages. So wages meaning, say, a day rate or something like that.
Okay.
I'm not really sure why Malay people weren't willing to work for wages. I'm guessing that they did not like this level of compensation, or perhaps they didn't like that they weren't owning certain parts of the business and preferred a different profit sharing arrangement, or perhaps they wanted to, own the land, own the mines, own the agricultural estate, whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure why that was. But it does sound like they could see that this was not an equitable arrangement.
Probably, yeah.
And then the other cultural group that were available as a labor force were Chinese migrants, which did come in large numbers, but even that wasn't enough for Britain's vision and for what Britain needed at the time. So they turned to their other colony in India. So just to set the scene, we are in the 19th century and we are in a post-slavery world. Britain has technically abolished slavery both in Britain itself and in its territories around the world.
Right.
So they couldn't use enslaved labor technically.
Right.
But what they could use was a different source of labor that was still incredibly cheap. And what they called this system was indentured labor.
Right. Indentured as in being imprisoned, or
Bonded, I suppose, would be the term that people would use.
Okay.
So bonded labor, where an employee would be bonded to an employer for a certain amount of time.
So in a contract, yeah.
Yeah. So this would be a contract between two parties, employee and employer. They would specify the time frame that you would work, and it was typically 3 to 5 years. And the promise of these contracts was that you would get good living conditions and high wages. So Britain starts getting people from its colony in India to work in Malaya as part of this indentured labor system. But the reality of this system was quite different to what was promised. First of all, the people that signed up to indentured labor were usually quite poor. They were also probably illiterate, a lot of them.
Right.
Therefore, they're not going to understand a contract written in English and the details of what it entails. So those contracts could have anything written in it.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes they were forced to sign it. Sometimes they were told they were just going down the road or to Sri Lanka, and they weren't told they were actually going to Malaya.
Right.
And wages were often not high, surprisingly. They were often quite low. And British people actually used to call these labourers coolies. And coolie is a Tamil word meaning small wage. So it's really embedded into the whole lexicon of the indentured labourer.
Right, yeah.
And so coolie is a derogatory term. So you'll still see it in a lot of historical texts and on websites today. And if you want to know more, you might have to Google coolie when you're trying to find out more information.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so now you have a lot of these Indian labourers, and they're often Tamil.
Right.
And they start working primarily in the agricultural plantations.
Okay.
So these plantations are pretty far away from the rest of society. They're far away from existing Indian populations, from Malay populations, and Chinese populations. So you're really not part of
society.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're in a camp, basically.
Yeah. And you basically couldn't leave the plantation. It was very difficult to leave. They either didn't let you leave, they either escorted you, or they made you pay to leave. Also, no one could go into the plantation.
Right, okay.
So you were locked in there. Living and sanitation conditions were pretty bad. And I think a lot of people actually died on the journey to Malaya itself. I'm going to read you a quote from a study on the history of estate Tamil schools in Malaya by Krishnan et al. And this article says, quote, "The situation faced by these labourers were virtually indistinguishable from the slavery system, whereby they were settled and controlled like slaves. Every aspect of their lives was under the direct control of employers," end quote. So that tells you just what it was like for these Tamil people to work in Malaya, sometimes forcibly. This was a system that wasn't just in Malaya, but across Britain's colonies, and it's estimated between 1834 and 1917, Britain took more than 1 million Indian indentured labourers to its 19 British colonies. So that's just an estimate. It could be higher, could be lower. So I'm not done though yet, Philip.
Yeah.
So the Tamil people were naturally quite frustrated by their situation.
Sure.
And so Britain needed to control them to some degree in order to keep them on the plantations and keep them from escaping.
Right.
One of the tools that they used was toddy.
Okay.
So toddy, being this Indian and Sri Lankan drink, was probably brought over by these Tamil labourers, and people started making it just as a social drink. So people start drinking it, getting drunk, getting inebriated, and I think the plantation owners weren't too happy about this. They didn't want like a drunk and inebriated population.
Yeah, they needed them to be efficient, I guess.
Yeah, but it did mean that if you were drunk, you were less likely to leave.
Right.
And if you were addicted to toddy, you were also less likely to leave.
Right.
So toddy then becomes a tool that these plantation owners use to keep the labourers onto the plantation for longer. And one way they did it was to set up toddy shops, official shops where labourers could go into, buy toddy very conveniently, so they didn't have to leave the estate.
But I mean, I guess then they would have wanted it to be kind of regulated in a way where you were probably given a ration of it, as in like you could be tipsy, but you couldn't be drunk.
Yeah, I think you could only, you couldn't buy it during the day. You'd have to buy it when you're not working.
Yeah, okay. So Britain regulated it in order to kind of keep control of it.
Yeah.
Britain seems to have this habit of, basically using substance abuse in order to kind of get what it wants, because we have to remember at this time the Opium War was right around the corner with China, and Britain and the East India Company were, and I think probably to this day, probably still considered to be the biggest drug dealers on earth. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they would continue that in Malaya too. So even though we think of opium wars as just a China issue, opium was also sold in Malaya, because you sold opium to Malaya to get tin and spices, which you would then sell on to China. Anyway, so back to toddy. The other advantage of these toddy shops was basically to recoup wages. So they were getting paid such small amounts anyway, but these toddy shops allowed Britain to basically win back some of what they were paying.
Fucking hell. Okay.
So, yeah. By the 1900s though, early 1900s, there was an anti-toddy movement. So the broader community, not just the estates, were seeing toddy as not a very nice drink, an evil drink that led to a lot of antisocial behavior. And so toddy consumption really plummeted from then.
It's probably also worth noting, given that toddy, typically being alcoholic, would not have gone down well with the Muslim Malay majority at the time.
Probably not. I don't think it was them that were part of the anti-toddy movement, though.
Oh, right, okay.
I think it was driven by Indian populations.
Oh, they just saw it as this taboo drink, so it was kind of ostracized within their own community.
And it could be because people thought that maybe toddy gave the rest of the population a bad name. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
So that is toddy and how it operated on these British-run plantations in Malaya.
God, we were such good guys, weren't we?
You just wanted to teach them how to be civilized, Philip.
All for rubber.
So toddy, therefore, is this really interesting food item in the context of Malaysia and its history, because on the one hand, it's a very culturally significant drink to the Indian and Sri Lankan population in Malaysia.
Right.
But on the other hand, it was a tool of the empire. And it was a tool that the British Empire used for both profit and labor control.
Yeah. They were strategic, if nothing else. That's all I'll say.
I think it is hard to respond to this, because it is so egregious, it is so disgusting. And as traumatic as it can be to talk about these topics, it's important to acknowledge and remember this history.
Yeah. I would imagine that a lot of people in the UK certainly wouldn't have known what Britain was up to in Malaysia.
Yeah.
I mean, people probably don't even know that Malaysia was a British colony.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody I think is quite well aware at this point of what was happening in the West Indies, not the East Indies, and probably in India as well.
If you're enjoying this episode, you can follow us on social media at SateOK. We'll be sharing beautiful photos taken by Philip of Malaysia, its people, and of course, the food. We'll also share photos of Malaysia from the archives, so you can see how the country has changed over time. You can also find links to give us a tip or donation to show your appreciation for the work we're doing. So head to our socials at SateOK or visit our website, sateok.com. So that was toddy then, but what is toddy now? So I think I wanted to know a bit more about the state of toddy in Malaysia today. What's its place in the culinary scene? What does it mean to the people today? So we spoke to Sushil Nair. So Sushil is the owner of Nachi Toddy, they're a toddy brewer and also a seller in both Malacca and the capital Kuala Lumpur. Here's Sushil.
For me, being into this world, I think this coconut toddy is something a bit cultural because it goes way back. I think talking about Malaya, before Malaysia was formed, Malaya when during the British rule especially, toddy was widely enjoyed by the Indian community actually. Hello, my name is Sushil. I'm from Malacca, originally from here, born and bred here. I grew up here most of my life. I've done my business for the past 5 years. So I came up with this business 5 years ago. It was 2019. It so happened that this particular drink, this coconut toddy, was actually introduced by my late dad. So he told me about this drink when I was in my early teens actually, during my secondary school time. He told me, hey, do you know there's this fresh alcohol drink? I said, no, I do not know. Have you heard of toddy before? I said, yeah, I've probably heard of probably the uncles and aunties talking about toddy, you know. And they say it's coconut toddy, it comes from the tree sap. And I'm like, so blur. And so happened last time in Malacca, there was this one particular shop. It's probably about 50-60 years old, I think, right now. So this shop was the only known shop in Malacca town, in the center of Malacca, which sells coconut toddy. Yeah. So we used to go there whenever we thought of getting toddy.
So just another reminder, when we talk about toddy in the Malaysian context, we are not talking about whiskey cocktails. Toddy is a completely different drink in Asia.
For Asian side, toddy means those fermented juices, yeah. Because I think in the Asian side, toddy is well known in terms of two types. There's the toddy from the coconut tree and toddy from the palm tree, if I'm not mistaken. Mine is coconut.
So toddy is the fermented tree sap that comes out of a coconut palm tree. These trees are also used to make palm sugar. So it's quite a versatile crop. And Sushil explained the Indian way of extracting and fermenting the sap.
Okay, the Indian way is when new shoots come out, when their leaves haven't actually opened up where the flowers appear. So what we do is we'll tie up that whole shoot, okay? Chop the edge off, and then you notice the tree sap will start to drip out. That tree shoot to sort of urge the juice to purge out more. They tap on that whole shoot. They tap. So that's why they put a bowl to it, and they wrap around the bowl and cover it to avoid rain or insects coming in. Because by right, the proper fermentation will probably take about 8 hours. After leaving it overnight, so what happened is during that time, after harvesting, the straight got to put it into a big tub, because part of the juice consists of sediments from the, how should I say, it's just the thickness of the whole juice. So what we do is we let them settle down, just quick one, just a few minutes. We start pouring them, letting them settle down. Of course, when you pour, you notice there will be bubbles on top of it, the foam. So what we do is we sort of push away the foam, and then start distributing it into little bottles. All this has to be done within 2 hours. So within these 2 hours, put it in the bottles, straight away chill it. Okay? Otherwise, it starts fermenting it too much, then it'll turn sour. So I don't want that to end up with the customers.
So what do his customers think about the taste of toddy?
Sometimes when I explain to those first-time customers, I say, it's just like durian, whether you like it or you totally hate it. So I get customers like that. So when they get that gist, then they would be prepared. But of course, I'll explain. You get that vinegary smell, which is quite common because it's in a fermenting phase. I keep joking to them, telling it smells like hell but tastes like heaven, right? So then they prepare. And so this kind of things which I tell them in advance before they try, because we give them little testers. We don't want to, just to overwhelm them with the taste. Yeah, okay. I will always tell customers, imagine you drinking kombucha. Yeah, so a lot of people can relate to kombucha because kombucha is on the rise now. A lot of people taking kombucha, so they're well prepared. So they know, the smell is okay. Then when they taste it, they say, like kombucha. Yeah. So even though sometimes I do get customers telling like, why does it taste like durian? I say, I do get sometimes. Then I joke with them. I telling like, funny thing that you say it tastes like durian. Just for you to know, at our plantation, we're just being surrounded by palm oil plantation and rubber trees. There's no durian at all. So if you get something tasting like durian, well, good then. Well, enjoy it even more then. If you're a durian lover and you get that durian taste. If you're not a durian lover, then sorry lah, never mind. Next. So so I would tell them it has that sourness because of the fermentation. You still get that sweetness from the tree sap.
The taste, however, differs between batches and also producers. Just like wine or whiskey, the final flavor depends on many factors.
And I always also inform my customers, some days you may get this kind of taste, some days you may get this kind of taste. A bit more on the sour side, on the sweet side, but generally sweet. Sure. Yeah. Okay? And then sometimes we harvest the juices, maybe because of the weather. If it's too hot, sometimes we get the bottles, the juices a bit fizzier. Yeah. And then when it's more of a rainy day, I think you will get much more diluted kind of juice. Not because of the rainwater seeping into the bowls, but because perhaps maybe just sucking up more water. Yeah, so it's a bit more diluted. So we get that once in a while, depending on the batches that we do.
You won't find many places in Malaysia that sell toddy though. Alcohol licenses don't come easily.
In case you don't know, toddy, this particular drink, is actually being controlled by the Customs Department of Malaysia. So they actually issue out the license for you to legally harvest and sell. So not many people have these licenses. It's kind of controlled thing, and I think most of the licenses, or probably should I say all of the licenses which are available currently, are being passed down from dad to son and so on. So that's how they sustain the business.
Sushil didn't have a license in his family. He came across a plantation after chatting with a friend.
Right up to my age, about 30 plus, and then it came back all of a sudden while sitting out with friends. We were drinking over one night, and my friend said, "Hey, do you know there's actually still available toddy plantations? I mean, despite developments and all, there's so many toddy plantations which actually closed down. Some of it maybe because of the economy, some is due to development, and others very possibly due to the kids not taking over. So you'll just die off like that." So eventually I was in search, and I found a decent plantation they were actually producing fresh. So I got to know the owner, who eventually became my partner today. So I remember going to his plantation late one night. It's about 10 p.m. because a friend who introduced me to this guy, he worked late, and he brought me all the way. We went through dark lanes and all. It was right deep in Malacca itself, but a lot of plantation roads we had to go through. Met up with him. He gave me a taste of his toddy, and coincidentally at that time it was just a business idea for me to sell it over San Pedro Festival.
Okay.
So have you all heard of San Pedro Festival?
No.
Okay, no. San Pedro Festival is a very it's actually a cultural event which became commercial past probably 20 years ago. So it's something celebrated locally here among the Portuguese community. So that's San Pedro. We've got live band, concert, we've got games during the daytime, we've got a lot of stalls, booths. So I thought, it could be a good chance for me to try out this business. So that's how I partnered with the plantation, became close partners with the owner, and from then on, I noticed the business went well because a lot of people found it very peculiar to find this kind of drinks. Most of the times when you go to this kind of events, you get cocktails, you get beers, or whatever, but you don't get this kind of specially freshly harvested natural alcohol. So yeah, so when I got to selling it, I got so excited that eventually the following weekend I decided to get more stock. So the festival was 4 days and was done over the previous weekend. The following weekend, I parked my car at the car park here, opened my bonnet, and started selling. And then of course, throughout me selling illegally, you get people calling the enforcements and all coming, but I was still searching for a suitable place nearby here because I think in KL it's quite common that you got seafood restaurants selling this kind of drinks. If you go to the Banting area, which is in Selangor, or perhaps Port Klang or Telok Gong, is quite famous of restaurants selling this kind of drinks to pair with their seafood. So I thought, makes sense if we already got a seafood range here, so why not just sell it? And plus we're just next to the sea, so it creates that ambience, that vibe, so it's very chill out kind of thing. So along the way, I think it was year in, because San Pedro was in June. By November, December, I managed to get license to open up a stall here legally. So yeah, so
While Sushil has been able to make a business for the past 5 years, he still faces taboos, particularly from his own community.
But I think throughout the years, a lot of people gave misconceptions. He had a bad name because maybe because of the Indian community itself. They would probably blame it generally, telling the young ones, telling the younger generation, don't drink toddy. It's something very alcoholic. It's bad. It can cause disruption for the family, breakdowns for the family. You get the dad will get drunk because of this, and so on, so on, so on. So eventually, it became a taboo among the community, the Indian community. So when I got into business, I realized up to today, 99% of my customers are actually Chinese and others except for Indians.
Oh, really? Yeah. Wow.
It is so true. And sadly, sometimes you still get that sort of depreciation from them.
Still taboo.
It is, yes. We've done business here before. A family was passing by. they were passing by and they said like, "Hey, Toddy! Oh my gosh, Toddy! Oh, yo!" And they sort of, you know, became scared of the word Toddy.
Yeah.
A few moments later, a Chinese man came and got so interested in the taste, he started buying a few bottles, maybe 4 or 5 bottles. So he was walking back happily with carrying his bottles, and we just wanted to check out the reaction of the family who was so they were so close with him. So they saw him carrying a few bottles, and they like got shocked. You could see that expression. They got shocked, like, wow, people really like this drink, which we curse and swear or you know.
Do you think it's changing to be less taboo?
I would always tell my wife, telling them, I think we've got a big responsibility in the society in today's world, that we're responsible to actually change the mindset of those people.
Despite the resistance from his own community, Sushil is making progress, especially with the younger generation.
We get customers who are pretty new. Like for me in KL, I get the customers from the younger generation who have never heard of this before. So I feel very privileged and glad to be the person responsible for introducing this to them.
And that was Sushil Nair from Nachi Toddy. Philip, what I find fascinating about his story is that he is an Indian businessman selling a very Indian drink, setting up in the Portuguese settlement of Malacca, selling toddy primarily to a Chinese population.
Multiculturalism, isn't it great?
I think that's like it like sums up Malaysia in some ways of just how multicultural it is, how fascinating the cultural dynamics are in Malaysia as well.
Yeah. He was so animated and so lively about it.
He was so excited about toddy.
I think it was interesting as well that he said that when his kids have got a bit of an upset stomach, he gives them just a little thimble of it, just because it's fermented, it's full of bacteria, which is supposedly quite good for your gut, and so helps just kind of like, I don't know, clear you out.
Yeah.
It's not a super alcoholic drink. It's maybe only about 3 or 4% max. Like I think Nachi Toddy, they sell
a couple of varieties.
There's a weaker one, which is maybe only 1 or 2%, which I personally, it is definitely a bit of an acquired taste. It's not unpleasant, but I definitely think it's the sort of thing, we got a couple of bottles off the guy and we kept it in our fridge, but by the second and third day, you're a bit kind of like, this is now becoming a bit funky.
You gotta have it fresh.
Yeah.
Over ice, it's very refreshing that way. But yeah, he does sell a couple of varieties. He has essentially a single blend, which is from one type of coconut, but he also has a mixed blend, which is from multiple different kinds. So you can see that as this industry kind of goes, people are brewing it in a way that people brew beer and brew wine.
Right,
We're
whiskey,
thinking about the complexities of the drink and how to get different flavors for different buyers.
Yeah. I think that just kind of comes to the acquired tastes, or like acquiring a taste for it in a discerning palate, for want of a better way of putting it. What I thought was also interesting that he said was that he was not remotely threatened by other toddy makers in the same way that you're talking about the single malt and blended varieties and things like that. I think there were in the same way that you get Isla whiskey and Speyside whiskey and like all these different regions, and or even like wine as well. You know, do they want a South African? Do you want an Australian? But even within Australia, it's like, oh, McLaren Vale, Barossa, Riverland, whatever. And I think they just saw that like the more the better, the more awareness of the beverage, the better. And you know, is the terroir in Perak better than it is in Malacca? You know,
that's no doubt does affect it in some ways, because he was saying that every batch is a little bit different.
Yeah, whether he catches it during the rain or whether it's a flowering season of other byproducts. I think there was something else that he said that wasn't in the interview there. He gets, I think, people from the Philippines coming over and buying the toddy bottles, taking it back to the Philippines, but intentionally leaving it out for like 6 months so that it turns to a vinegar, which I guess it's kind of like apple cider vinegar or any of these other kind of like,
red wine vinegar.
Yeah, these kind of malted vinegars, I guess, where yeah, you would just use it. Probably it would be very effective at deglazing pans when you're like cooking something that's sticking to a wok or whatever. A deglazer. What would Maggie Beer call that? A verjuice?
Verjuice is grape-based.
Right, okay, well, it's called coconut verjuice. There you go. Up market it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that Filipino connection with toddy is really interesting because it reminds you of that Nusantara spirit, which we've talked about a lot in this podcast.
I think that was something that Christopher Tan said in one of our previous episodes as well. It's like wherever there's a coastline, there are coconuts growing. And so like whether it's in desserts, whether it's in beverages, whether it's in the meals, like coconut is just such a staple in the tropics. That, you know, of course these saps are going to fall from the trees and people have been living underneath them for thousands of years and they will have found novel ways of using the products of it to enhance the food, which is why we're making this show. So
yeah, absolutely. So if you are going to Malaysia, do try and seek out toddy and try this very important drink. As I said before, it is a bit hard to find. So because Malaysia is a Muslim majority country, toddy is not going to be something that's promoted in like big tourism campaigns, for instance. You know, it doesn't appear in the big, you have to try the street food of Malaysia, try the roti canai, try the laksa. They're not going to say try the toddy.
Yeah. In the same way they're not going to tell you to try tiger beer. But it's as prevalent as that is.
And I think the other reason why toddy is a bit hard to find, because it's made by independent brewers, and it's an alcoholic beverage, it can't really compete with the advertising power of some of those other massive multinational beer brands, for instance, that are operating in Malaysia. It can't compete against Tiger, for instance.
No, not with a global market,
Yeah, so toddy does get obscured quite a lot. Obviously, Nachi Toddy isn't the only brewer and seller in Malaysia, so there are several others across the country. But yeah, you do have to search for it a little bit more. Even if you can't get toddy, if you're going to Malaysia, or maybe you just don't drink alcohol, there are so many other ways to engage with Indian food culture. And I think it's really hard to overestimate the impact of the Indian community on Malaysia's food scene, because it is massive, both, I'm getting hungry thinking about it. The influence is quite extensive. So many of Malaysia's most famous dishes are basically Indian origin. Roti canai probably being the most famous, called roti paratha in Singapore, but that's, you know, your flaky flatbread. In Penang, you've got nasi kandar, which is this curry dish where you get rice and you flood it with a whole bunch of curry.
Roti canai I think is one of those dishes where I time stopped when I had it for the first time. Just that, like, it's basically for like Westerners, it's just like, well, it's flour and water mixed together and like fried with oil. Like, it's like, what not to love? Like, we all love a croissant. That's basically what a croissant is.
I think out of all the foods that I miss about Malaysia, roti canai is probably the number one, and it's what I want immediately as soon as I land in Malaysia.
Yeah, I think it was our first and last meal.
I'd say the other major, most obvious contributor to Indian food culture in Malaysia are the mamaks. So mamak translates to uncle in Tamil, but a mamak is a type of restaurant that's open 24 hours. And so this is where you would get your roti canai from and your, you know, all your different curries. But because they're open 24/7, they are like a meeting point for all aspects of society. Whether you're rich or poor or whatever culture you're from, people congregate in mamaks. They're like that perfect third space.
Right. You know? Yeah. The American diner equivalent.
Yeah.
Bright fluorescent lights, food and coffee served at any time of the day. Yeah. If you're a taxi driver or if you're a truck driver, like, it doesn't matter. Like, go in there and get your scran.
Yeah. So going back to our food of the day, toddy, it is a symbol of the Indian community in Malaysia, but it's also a reminder of how this community has been treated in the past. It's a reminder of that indentured labor system during the days of the British Empire. It's also interesting that toddy today is actually quite hard to find. It's also pretty hard to find stories about the Indian community and their history. And I think that in Malaysia, the Indian community is very much overshadowed by some of the other cultures.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you're seeing representation about Malaysia, there'll be Malay people, Peranakan people, Chinese people. Not as often will you see the Indian community being represented.
Yeah, it's probably not hard to see why, if there's, you know, intergenerational trauma from the fact that so many hundreds of thousands of these Tamil workers came over and were basically forced to work on plantations for meager wages.
Yeah. But yeah, just a reminder that Indians have been in the region for centuries. Not all of them came under this indentured labor system. So if you're heading to Malaysia though, search out for toddy, search for those stories and get to know the Indian and the Sri Lankan community in Malaysia. So if we just turn back our attention to the history and just sum things up, Britain now has its sphere of influence with that Anglo-Dutch treaty. It now basically has British Malaya, which is ripe for picking. So it has Penang, it has Malacca, and it has Singapore, but there were many other territories that it has its sights on and many other sultans to kind of coerce in order to gain a foothold in the rest of the peninsula. And so we're going to explore that in the next episode entitled Chicken Rice and the Making of an Empire. And that's going to be our last episode of the season, so you do not want to miss out. So please join us for the next episode, the final episode of Satay.
Okay.